At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law told everyone I was living off my son, she said with a laugh as she topped off a guest's wine glass. Around the table, a few people chuckled politely. My son smiled into his plate and said nothing. I sat there holding a serving spoon full of sweet potatoes, feeling every eye in the room drift toward me. I smiled. 3 weeks later, I opened a folder that changed everything they thought they knew about our family. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end. And tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. More than Christmas, more than birthdays. There was something comforting about gathering around a crowded table with family, passing dishes from hand to hand, sharing recipes that had traveled through generations. I held on to those traditions even tighter. Some people collect antiques, some people collect photographs. I collected family moments, or at least, I tried to. That Thursday morning, I woke before sunrise. My small house in Columbus, Ohio, was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the old hardwood floors. The silence felt heavier during the holidays. Robert used to wake up before me every Thanksgiving. I'd always find him in the kitchen pretending he was helping while secretly stealing pieces of turkey skin before dinner. The memory made me smile, then it made me miss him. I stood at the kitchen counter preparing the dishes I had promised to bring. Sweet potato casserole, green bean casserole, homemade dinner rolls. The same recipes my family had requested every year for nearly 2 decades. As I packed everything into insulated carriers, I checked my phone. A message from my son Michael. "Looking forward to seeing you, Mom. Love you." The words warmed me. For a moment, I felt foolish for worrying. Lately, things had felt different between us. Not openly hostile, just distant. Conversations shorter, visits less frequent, phone calls interrupted. Every family seems to change as children grow older, at least that's what I kept telling myself. By noon, I loaded the food into my car and drove across town to Michael's house. His neighborhood looked like something from a holiday movie. Large homes, decorated porches, orange and red leaves scattered across perfectly maintained lawns. When I arrived, cars already filled the driveway. Family friends, neighbors, co-workers. The annual Thanksgiving gathering had grown larger every year since Michael married Jennifer. I carried my dishes inside. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house. Laughter echoed from the living room. Football played on the television. For a moment, everything felt normal. Emma, my 17-year-old granddaughter, rushed over first. "Grandma!" She wrapped her arms around me. Unlike most teenagers, she still hugged me without embarrassment. "I saved you a seat next to me," she whispered. My heart softened instantly. "Thank you, sweetheart." Across the room, my 14-year-old grandson Noah waved before returning to a video game conversation with his cousins. Jennifer appeared moments later. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect hostess. She kissed the air near my cheek. "Evelyn, you made the casseroles." "Wonderful." Not "thank you." Not "we're glad you're here." Just an acknowledgement that I had completed an assigned task. Still, I smiled. I always smiled. Dinner began around 4. 20 people squeezed around 2 long tables pushed together. Candles flickered, wine glasses clinked. The turkey was carved. Everyone seemed relaxed, happy, safe. I remember thinking that maybe I had imagined the distance growing between me and my sons, as family. Maybe everything was fine. Maybe I was simply lonely. Then Jennifer stood to make a toast. The room quieted. She lifted her glass. "I just want to say how thankful I am for our family." Everyone raised their glasses. So many people contribute to making our lives wonderful. Nods around the table, smiles, agreement. Then her eyes landed on me, and her smile changed, just slightly, enough for me to notice. "Of course," she continued, laughing lightly. "We're also thankful Michael has such a generous heart." A few people chuckled. She pointed toward me. "After all, he's been supporting his mother for years." More laughter. Not cruel laughter, the uncomfortable kind. The kind people use when they aren't sure if something is a joke. My hands froze beneath the table. I looked at Michael. My son. The boy I had raised. The man I had sacrificed for. He smiled weakly, then lowered his eyes. In polite conversation, I realized something far more painful than Jennifer's comment. The people sitting around that table believed her. And somehow, somewhere along the way, they had been taught a version of my life that wasn't true. I didn't sleep much that night. After I got home from Thanksgiving dinner, I placed the empty casserole dishes on my kitchen counter and stood there for a long time without turning on a single light. The house was dark except for the glow coming from the microwave clock. 11:42 p.m. Outside, the November wind rattled the bare branches against my windows. Inside, the silence felt almost alive. For years, I had told myself that loneliness was something a person could get used to. After Robert died, I learned how to eat dinner alone, how to watch television alone, how to sit through holidays without hearing his voice from the next room. But what happened at Thanksgiving wasn't loneliness. It was something else. It was humiliation. Not because Jennifer had made the comment, not even because several people laughed. What stayed with me was Michael's silence. My son had been sitting less than 6 feet away from me, close enough to hear every word, close enough to see my face, and he said nothing. I took off my coat and slowly unpacked the food containers. Most of the dishes I brought home were still nearly full. Nobody had touched much of the sweet potato casserole. Normally that would have bothered me. Robert used to joke that Thanksgiving wasn't complete without my casserole. This year, I barely noticed. My mind kept replaying the moment over and over. He's been supporting his mother for years. The strange thing was that Jennifer hadn't sounded angry. She sounded confident, as if she had repeated that story many times before, as if she believed it herself. I poured a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The same oak table Robert and I had bought nearly 30 years earlier. The wood carried small scratches from family dinners, school projects, birthday cakes, and countless ordinary evenings. Memories covered every inch of that table. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and stared into the darkness. When had things started changing? I couldn't point to one moment. It wasn't a dramatic event. There had been no big argument, no family feud, no explosion, just small things, tiny things. The kind people ignore until they become impossible to ignore. A few years earlier, Jennifer started making plans without including me. At first, I assumed she was busy. Young families often are. Then holiday invitations began arriving later and later, sometimes only a day before the event. Sometimes through Michael instead of directly from her. Then came the photographs. Pictures posted online from family outings I never knew were happening. Birthday lunches, weekend trips, graduation celebrations. I wasn't always excluded, just often enough to notice, and never enough to complain. Whenever I mentioned it, there was always an explanation. It was last minute. We didn't think you'd be interested. It was mostly for the kids. Excuses. Reasonable excuses. The kind that sound believable when heard one at a time. I remembered Christmas 2 years earlier. Jennifer had insisted on hosting. She assigned everyone a dish to bring. Everyone except me. When I asked what I could contribute, she smiled and said, "Just bring yourself, Evelyn. You've done enough over the years." At the time, I thought she was being kind. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I woke up with a headache. The gray Ohio sky hung low outside my bedroom window. For several minutes, I remained under the blankets staring at the ceiling. I considered calling Michael. Part of me wanted an explanation. Another part of me wanted an apology. But deep down, I already knew what would happen. He would tell me Jennifer hadn't meant it that way. He would say I was misunderstanding. He would ask me not to make a big deal out of it. The same pattern, the same conversation, the same ending. Instead, I got dressed and began cleaning the house. Whenever life became complicated, cleaning helped me think. I dusted bookshelves, organized kitchen drawers, sorted old mail, simple tasks, familiar tasks, the kind that quieted the mind. By noon, I found myself standing in front of a hallway closet. Inside were dozens of storage boxes, family keepsakes, old photographs, tax documents, paperwork accumulated over decades. I wasn't looking for anything specific, at least that's what I told myself. But something had changed after Thanksgiving. For the first time, I found myself wondering how many people believed Jennifer's version of my life. How many thought I depended on Michael? How many believed I had contributed nothing? The thought settled heavily in my chest, because the truth was very different. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Jennifer's comment hadn't appeared out of nowhere. Stories like that don't grow overnight. They grow slowly, year after year, conversation after conversation, until eventually everyone accepts them as truth. As I stood there looking at those old boxes, a memory surfaced. Years ago, shortly after Michael and Jennifer bought their first house, someone had made a comment at a family barbecue. A comment I hadn't thought about in years. At the time, I dismissed it. Now it suddenly felt important. And before the day was over, a simple question from a relative would force me to look at the past in a completely different way. The following Tuesday, my cousin Margaret called. At first, I almost didn't answer. I'd spent the last few days avoiding most conversations, not because I was angry, but because I was tired. Tired of replaying Thanksgiving in my head. Tired of wondering whether I was imagining things. Tired of trying to explain away behavior that no longer made sense. The phone rang a second time, then a third. Finally, I picked up. "Hello? Evelyn, it's Margaret." Her voice carried the familiar warmth I'd known my entire life. Margaret was only 2 years younger than me, but she'd always acted like an older sister, practical, observant, the type of woman who noticed things other people missed. We talked about ordinary things at first, the weather, her arthritis, the Thanksgiving leftovers she was still trying to finish. Then her tone changed. "Evelyn, can I ask you something?" I stared out the kitchen window. "Was Jennifer serious when she said Michael has been supporting you for years?" My stomach tightened. So someone else had noticed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being overly sensitive. Someone else had heard it too. "I honestly don't know anymore," I said quietly. Margaret sighed. "That's what bothered me." "What do you mean?" "Well," she hesitated. "Maybe my memory is failing. But wasn't it you who helped Michael buy his first house?" I froze. The question landed harder than I expected. Because the answer was yes. Absolutely yes. I remembered every detail. The house had been purchased almost 18 years earlier. Michael was newly married. Jennifer was pregnant with Emma. Interest rates were climbing. Money was tight. The young couple had found a small 2-story home in a suburb outside Columbus. Nothing extravagant. But they didn't have enough for the down payment. I remembered Michael sitting at this very kitchen table. His shoulders slumped, his voice full of worry. "I don't know what we're going to do, Mom." At the time, Robert and I had some savings, not a fortune, just money we'd accumulated through years of careful planning. We looked at each other, and without hesitation, we helped. That's what parents do. Or at least that's what we believed. "We'll figure it out," Robert had told him. And we did. Margaret interrupted my thoughts. "Evelyn, I'm here. You did help them, didn't you?" "Yes." The word came out almost as a whisper. Margaret was silent for several seconds. "Then why would Jennifer tell people Michael has been carrying you financially?" I had no answer. After we hung up, I remained seated at the kitchen table for a long time. The memory wouldn't leave me alone. Not just the house. Other things started surfacing: tuition payments, medical bills, the wedding, childcare. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became, because I wasn't remembering isolated acts of generosity. I was remembering a pattern, a very long pattern, one that stretched across decades. That evening, I walked into the hallway closet again. The same closet I'd stood in a few days earlier. This time, I wasn't wandering. This time, I was looking for something. I pulled several storage boxes onto the floor. Dust floated through the air. Old labels stared back at me. Tax records, house documents, bank statements, family files. For years, I had kept everything. Robert used to tease me about it. "You could probably reconstruct American history from these boxes." At the time, I laughed. Now I was grateful. I opened the first box. Inside were folders organized by year, carefully labeled, carefully preserved. I flipped through papers dating back nearly 20 years. Insurance records, utility bills, retirement statements. Then I found a folder marked Michael, House Purchase. My heartbeat quickened. I carried it to the dining room table. The afternoon sun streamed through the window as I opened the folder. Inside were copies of checks, loan documents, closing paperwork, bank records, everything. I adjusted my reading glasses and began turning pages. Slowly, carefully. The deeper I looked, the more details returned. Things I hadn't thought about in years. Things I'd never mentioned to anyone. Not because they were secret, because I never considered them important. Parents help their children. That's what we do. We don't keep score. We don't ask for recognition. We certainly don't expect gratitude decades later. But something felt different now. Thanksgiving had changed that. Jennifer's comment had changed that. Because if people were going to tell a story about my life, then it should at least be the truth. As evening settled outside, I continued reviewing the documents. And then I found something that made me stop turning pages. A single document. Simple, ordinary, easy to overlook. Yet it proved something I hadn't realized before. Something that would completely change the way I viewed Thanksgiving dinner. And perhaps the way I viewed my son's marriage altogether. I stared at the document for a long time before I fully understood what I was looking at. Outside, the November sky had turned dark. The dining room was lit only by a small lamp near the window and the yellow glow from the kitchen. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I adjusted my glasses and read the page again. Then a third time. The document was a copy of a cashier's check issued 18 years earlier. The amount was larger than I remembered. Much larger. Back then, Robert and I hadn't thought about it as a financial transaction. To us, it was simply helping our son start his life. But sitting there years later, with Thanksgiving still fresh in my mind, I saw it differently, not as a favor, as a fact. A fact that directly contradicted the story Jennifer had told everyone. I leaned back in my chair. For years, I had remembered the house down payment. What I had forgotten was everything surrounding it, the phone calls, the meetings, the stress, the sacrifices. Memory has a strange way of softening difficult years. It highlights the happy moments and hides the details. But once I started reading those documents, the details came rushing back. I remembered the spring when Michael and Jennifer found the house. Emma hadn't been born yet. Jennifer was expecting their first child. They were excited, nervous, hopeful. Every weekend they visited open houses. Every Sunday they called us with updates. Robert and I listened patiently to every story. The kitchen, the backyard, the school district, the commute. Young couples dream out loud. Parents listen. That's how it works. Then reality arrived. The bank approved their mortgage, but the required down payment was more than they had available. I still remembered the evening Michael came to our house. He looked exhausted. Jennifer sat beside him on our sofa. Her eyes were red from crying. At the time, I felt sorry for her. She seemed overwhelmed, scared. They both did. "We might lose the house," Michael said. Robert looked at me. I looked at him. No discussion was needed. After nearly 30 years of marriage, some conversations happened without words. We already knew what we would do. A week later, we transferred the money. Not because we were wealthy. We weren't. Robert worked hard his entire life. I worked hard too. Every dollar represented years of discipline, years of skipped vacations, years of budgeting, years of choosing responsibility over luxury. But helping Michael felt worth it. I remembered how grateful they seemed. At least at the time. Jennifer hugged me. Twice. She cried. She told everyone how generous we had been. For years afterward, she referred to the house as our blessing. The memory made me frown, because somewhere along the way, that version of history had disappeared, replaced by a different one. A version where Michael had become the provider, and I had become the dependent. I closed the folder and walked into the kitchen. The kettle was still sitting on the stove. I filled it with water and waited for it to boil. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window above the sink. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something stronger than hurt. Confusion, not about Jennifer. People sometimes rewrite history when it benefits them. I understood that. What I couldn't understand was Michael. My son knew the truth. He had lived it. He had signed the paperwork. He had accepted the help. So why had he remained silent? The question followed me back to the dining room. I opened another folder, then another, and another. The deeper I looked, the more examples appeared. A tuition payment from his final year of college. A loan Robert and I covered when Michael's business idea failed in his 20s. Several months of daycare expenses after Emma was born. Emergency veterinary bills when their dog became sick. Medical expenses after Noah broke his arm. One document led to another. Each one telling a story. Each one reminding me of a moment when Robert and I stepped forward without hesitation. Not because we expected repayment, because we loved our family. By midnight, paperwork covered nearly the entire dining room table. I sat quietly among the stacks. The evidence wasn't dramatic. No hidden secrets, no shocking scandal. Just years of support, years of helping, years of showing up. And somehow those years had been erased. I thought back to Thanksgiving. Jennifer standing at the head of the table. Glass raised. Smile perfectly practiced. The confidence in her voice bothered me now more than the insult itself. People only speak that confidently when they believe they won't be challenged. That realization settled heavily in my chest. Because Jennifer hadn't looked worried. She hadn't glanced at Michael for approval. She hadn't hesitated. She spoke like someone who had told that story many times before, to neighbors, friends, coworkers, perhaps even family. The thought made me uncomfortable. How many people believed it? How many conversations had taken place when I wasn't there? How many times had my name come up only to be followed by a version of events that wasn't true? I didn't know. But for the first time, I wanted answers. Not revenge. Not an argument. Answers. The next morning I called Margaret. She answered immediately. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. I laughed softly. "You know me too well." "I know that voice," she replied. "You found something." I looked down at the folders spread across my table. "More than something." "What do you mean?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. Finally I said, "Margaret, I think I've spent years ignoring things because I wanted peace." Silence, then a gentle response. "A lot of mothers do." I stared at the documents again. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had ignored too much, excused too much, overlooked too much. Not because I was weak, because I loved my family. But love has a dangerous side. Sometimes it makes us explain away behavior that should never have been accepted. As our conversation ended, Margaret said something that stayed with me, something simple, something impossible to forget. "Evelyn, if the truth is on your side, don't be afraid to look at all of it." After hanging up, I sat alone in my dining room. Morning sunlight stretched across the stacks of paperwork. And for the first time, I stopped asking whether Jennifer's Thanksgiving comment had been unfair. Instead, I started asking a different question. If she was willing to lie about something this important, what else had she been lying about? For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret's question. Not because of what she had asked, because of what it had uncovered. Once you begin pulling on a loose thread, you often discover it isn't a thread at all. It's an entire seam coming apart. The paperwork remained spread across my dining room table. Every morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down with another folder. Every evening, I found another memory attached to another document. The deeper I looked, the less comfortable I became. Not because I was discovering anything criminal, nothing dramatic, nothing that belonged on the evening news. What I found was something much quieter. A pattern. And patterns can be harder to ignore than isolated events. On Thursday afternoon, I found an old photo album tucked inside one of the storage boxes. I almost laughed when I opened it. There was Michael at 22. Young, thin, standing beside a used pickup truck he was unbelievably proud of. Another picture showed him in his college graduation gown. Robert stood beside him with his arm around his shoulders. I remembered that day clearly. The weather had been unbearably hot. The ceremony felt endless, and Robert had cried harder than anyone, even though he denied it afterward. I smiled at the memory. Then my eyes landed on another photograph, Michael and Jennifer on their wedding day. Jennifer looked radiant, Michael looked completely in love. I studied the image for several moments. Back then, I genuinely liked her. People often assume difficult relationships begin badly. Mine didn't. I welcomed Jennifer into our family. I wanted her to feel loved, included, safe. When Emma was born, I drove across town nearly every day to help. Not because anyone asked me to, because I wanted to. Young parents are exhausted. I remembered folding tiny baby clothes, preparing meals, watching Emma sleep while Jennifer caught up on rest. Years later, when Noah arrived, I did the same thing. Those weren't sacrifices. At least not in my mind. They were acts of love. That's why Thanksgiving hurt so much. Not because Jennifer insulted me. Because she erased an entire history, an entire relationship, an entire lifetime of showing up when my family needed me. The following morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in months. Richard Collins, Robert's longtime friend and the attorney who had handled many of our family's legal matters over the years. I answered immediately. "Richard." "Evelyn." His calm voice sounded exactly the same as it had 20 years earlier. "I was thinking about you after Thanksgiving." I frowned. "How did you hear about Thanksgiving?" A brief pause. "Margaret called me." Of course she had. Margaret never believed in suffering quietly. I couldn't help smiling. That sounds like her. Richard chuckled softly. Then his tone became more serious. "Evelyn, there's something I've been meaning to ask." I felt my stomach tighten slightly. "What is it?" "Have Michael and Jennifer ever repaid the money from the house?" For a moment, I simply stared across the room. The question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I had never really considered it. Repayment had never been the point. Robert and I helped because we wanted to help. We never treated our son like a business arrangement. I don't think so, I finally said. Richard was quiet. Then he said something unexpected. You know, Robert kept very detailed records. I glanced toward the dining room table. Apparently I do too. Yes, he said. That's why I'm asking. A strange feeling settled over me. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something closer to clarity. For years, I had viewed every act of support as a separate event. College tuition, the house, the wedding, the children, emergency expenses. Each one existed in its own little box. But looking at everything together created a very different picture. A much larger picture, one that completely contradicted the story Jennifer had been telling. Richard continued. Evelyn, I knew Robert well. My throat tightened slightly. I still missed hearing people talk about my husband. Even after 4 years. He was proud of helping Michael. Richard said, very proud. I smiled. That sounds like him. But he would never have allowed anyone to pretend those sacrifices never happened. The words lingered after the conversation ended. I sat quietly for several minutes. The house was silent again. But this time the silence felt different. Less painful. More focused. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I stopped questioning my memory. Stopped wondering whether I had overreacted. Stopped making excuses. The facts were sitting right in front of me. In folders. In photographs. In records spanning decades. The truth wasn't complicated. The truth was documented. And the more I looked at it, the more one thing became clear. Jennifer's story only worked because nobody had ever challenged it. Nobody had laid the real story beside the invented one. Nobody had compared the two. I wasn't interested in revenge. I still wasn't. But Christmas was only a few weeks away. And for the first time, I found myself wondering what might happen if the truth finally had a seat at the table. Christmas was approaching faster than I expected. The decorations had already started appearing across my neighborhood. Wreaths hung from front doors. Twinkling lights lined rooftops. Every grocery store seemed to be playing the same holiday songs on repeat. Normally, Christmas was my favorite time of year. This year felt different. Not sad. Not exactly. Just clearer. For weeks I had been sorting through old records, photographs, and memories. The more I uncovered, the more I understood that Thanksgiving hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been a symptom. A symptom of something that had been growing quietly for years. Seeing my granddaughter's name on the screen immediately lifted my mood. Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Grandma. There was hesitation in her voice. The kind teenagers use when they're trying to approach a difficult subject. Can I ask you something? I smiled. You can ask me anything. A brief silence. Then she said it. Were you upset after Thanksgiving? The question caught me off guard. Not because it was unexpected. Because she was the first person in the family to ask. The first person. I admitted. Emma sighed softly. I thought so. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then she continued. I didn't like what Mom said. The words settled heavily in my chest. Not because they were dramatic. Because they were honest. I wasn't sure if you heard it, she added. Oh, I heard it. I thought it was mean. I closed my eyes briefly. Emma had always reminded me of Robert. Not in appearance, in character. She noticed things. She paid attention. She cared when people were hurting. The certainty in her voice surprised me. Teenagers often avoid family conflict. Emma didn't. People shouldn't talk about you like that. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Because after weeks of confusion and disappointment, those simple words felt like a lifeline. Someone else saw it. Someone else understood. We talked for nearly an hour. School, college applications, Christmas plans, normal things, comforting things. Before hanging up, she said something else that stayed with me. Grandma? Yes? You've always helped everyone. I swallowed hard. I just wanted you to know that I remember. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the carpet, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something close to peace. Not because my problems were solved, because I wasn't completely alone. A few days later, an invitation arrived. Christmas dinner. Michael and Jennifer's house. Same place. Same people. Different holiday. I stared at the invitation longer than necessary. Part of me considered declining. It would have been easy. No awkward conversations, no uncomfortable memories, no risk of further humiliation. Just a quiet Christmas at home. But the thought disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Running away had never been my style. Besides, I wasn't afraid of Jennifer. I wasn't even angry anymore. What I felt was something far more useful. Certainty. I continued organizing the documents. Not obsessively, not like someone preparing for battle. Simply carefully, methodically. I purchased a new folder. A simple black leather folder with interior pockets. Inside, I placed copies of everything. The house down payment, college tuition records, loan documents, bank transfers, photographs, letters, nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just facts. I wasn't planning to show them to anyone. At least, that wasn't my intention. But something about having them organized made me feel calmer, prepared. The week before Christmas, Margaret stopped by with a tin of homemade cookies. She immediately noticed the folder sitting on the dining room table. "Still working on your project?" I laughed. "It seems I accidentally started one." Margaret sat down across from me. For several moments, she flipped through some of the copies. Her eyebrows slowly rose. "Evelyn, what? This is a lot." I nodded. That's what surprised me. Because it was. When viewed separately, each act of support seemed ordinary. Together, they told an entirely different story. Margaret closed the folder. "What are you going to do?" I thought about the question carefully. Then I answered honestly. "Nothing." She looked skeptical. I smiled. "I mean it. No confrontation?" "No." "No dramatic family showdown?" The image almost made me laugh. "Definitely not." "So why keep all this?" I glanced toward the folder. Because the answer had become clear. Because for years, I've been questioning my own memory. Margaret nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I don't have to." The truth was no longer something I felt. It was something I could prove. A few days later, Christmas Eve arrived. Snow covered the lawns across the neighborhood. Lights sparkled from nearly every house on the street. The black folder rested beside my coat near the front door. I hadn't consciously decided to bring it, not really, but as I prepared to leave for Christmas dinner, my eyes kept returning to it. Finally, I picked it up, just in case. Not because I planned to use it. Because something told me the story Jennifer started at Thanksgiving wasn't finished yet, and before the night was over, I would discover exactly how far that story had spread. Christmas dinner looked almost identical to Thanksgiving. The same house, the same dining room, many of the same guests. The same carefully arranged decorations designed to make everything appear warm and perfect. As I parked in front of Michael's house, snowflakes drifted slowly through the evening air. The black folder rested on the passenger seat beside me. For a moment, I considered leaving it in the car. Then I picked it up, not because I expected to need it. Because something inside me said I would feel better having it nearby. The house buzzed with conversation. Christmas music played softly from a speaker in the living room. Children laughed near the staircase. The scent of cinnamon, roasted ham, and pine filled the air. On the surface, everything looked cheerful, normal. Emma spotted me first. "Grandma?" She hugged me tightly. Stronger than usual, longer than usual. The gesture made me smile. Behind her, Noah waved from the sofa. "Merry Christmas." "Grandma, Merry Christmas, sweetheart." For a while, the evening passed peacefully. I chatted with relatives, admired Christmas decorations, complimented the food. If Thanksgiving had never happened, I might have believed everything was fine. Then dinner began, and slowly, I noticed something. People were treating me differently. Not openly, not rudely, just differently. A few comments here and there. Small things. Questions that seemed harmless on the surface, yet somehow felt connected. One guest asked whether I was enjoying retirement. Another asked if living alone had become difficult. Someone else casually wondered whether Michael helped manage my finances. Each question seemed innocent, but together they formed a pattern. The same feeling returned. The feeling I'd experienced after Thanksgiving. A story was circulating, and people believed it. Halfway through dinner, I finally understood how widespread it had become. A friend of Jennifer's leaned toward me with a sympathetic smile. "You must be so grateful for Michael." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She looked surprised. "You know, everything he does for you." The table remained quiet. Nobody interrupted. Nobody corrected her. The woman continued, "Jennifer talks about it all the time." My stomach tightened. All the time. Not once. Not occasionally. All the time. I took a sip of water. Carefully. Slowly. The room suddenly felt warmer than before. Not because I was angry. Because a puzzle piece had finally fallen into place. Thanksgiving wasn't the beginning. It was simply the first time I heard the story myself. The story had apparently been traveling for years. Through conversations, holiday gatherings, coffee dates, neighborhood events, little by little, until people accepted it as fact. Across the table, Jennifer laughed at something another guest said. Confident, relaxed, completely comfortable. And why wouldn't she be? As far as she knew, nobody would challenge her version of events. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of Michael's coworkers raised his glass. I have to say, he said, smiling toward my son, it's admirable how much you've sacrificed taking care of family. Several people nodded. My eyes drifted toward Michael. I waited. For the first time in weeks, I truly waited. This was his opportunity. A simple one. He could laugh and correct the misunderstanding. He could say, actually, my mother helped us more than we ever helped her. One sentence. That was all it would take. Instead, Michael smiled awkwardly and said nothing. Again, the silence hurt more than Jennifer's words ever could, because silence is agreement when the truth is sitting right in front of you. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Jennifer broke the tension. Oh, Michael's always been generous. She reached for his hand. He never complains. A few guests smiled, others nodded. The story continued growing. Right there, in real time. And suddenly I felt something unexpected. Not sadness, not anger, relief. Because for weeks I had questioned myself. Wondered whether I had exaggerated Thanksgiving. Wondered whether I was being overly sensitive. Wondered whether grief had clouded my judgment. Now I knew, without question, without doubt, I had seen the truth, and so had everyone else at that table. The difference was that they only knew one version of it. I quietly placed my napkin beside my plate. Then I reached down and touched the black folder resting beside my chair, not opening it, not yet, just touching it, feeling its weight. Feeling the years of documents inside, house records, tuition payments, loan agreements, photographs, letters, facts, simple facts. The conversation around me continued. Nobody noticed my hand resting on the folder. Nobody noticed the decision forming in my mind. Because for the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't wondering whether I should speak. I was wondering how much longer I should remain silent. And, before Christmas dinner ended, someone at that table was about to ask a question that would make silence impossible. The question came from someone I least expected. Richard Collins, Robert's old friend. The attorney. The man who had known our family for more than 30 years. He had arrived late because he had been visiting his daughter earlier that afternoon. Most of the guests knew him, and several people greeted him warmly when he entered. Now he sat near the far end of the table, sipping coffee while dessert plates were being cleared away. The conversation had drifted toward housing prices, mortgage rates, the cost of raising children, normal holiday topics, at least until one guest laughed and said, honestly, I don't know how young families survive these days without helping their parents. A few people nodded. Then Jennifer smiled. Sometimes it works the other way around. Several guests chuckled. I didn't. Neither did Richard. Jennifer glanced toward me. You know how it is. Some parents need more support than others. The room grew slightly quieter, not silent, but quieter. The comment wasn't direct enough to sound rude. That was always her talent. She rarely insulted people openly. She preferred suggestions, implications, little comments that allowed her to appear innocent if challenged. Unfortunately for her, Richard had spent his entire career listening to people choose their words carefully. He set down his coffee cup, then asked a simple question. Support? Jennifer smiled. Financially. Richard looked genuinely confused. Michael supports Evelyn financially? Jennifer laughed lightly. Well, someone has to. A few nervous smiles appeared around the table. The atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically, just enough for everyone to notice. Richard looked from Jennifer to Michael, then back again. I wasn't aware of that, Jennifer shrugged. Oh, Michael would never brag about it. For the first time all evening, I noticed uncertainty flicker across Michael's face. Very briefly. Then it disappeared. Richard remained calm. Almost too calm. I see. That was all he said. 3 simple words. Yet something about them made Jennifer uncomfortable. Perhaps she recognized the tone. Perhaps she didn't. Either way, she continued talking, explaining, expanding, adding details. The way people sometimes do when they're trying too hard to make a story sound convincing. As she spoke, I found myself studying the faces around the table. Most guests seemed sympathetic, a few looked impressed, others appeared surprised. Not because they doubted her, because they believed her. That realization no longer hurt, not the way it had at Thanksgiving. Because now I understood something important. People weren't reacting to me. They were reacting to information they assumed was true. How could they know otherwise? Nobody had ever given them another version. Then Richard turned toward me. His expression was gentle, respectful. "Evelyn." I met his eyes. "Yes?" The room seemed to grow quieter. "I hope you don't mind me asking." I already knew what was happening. Not because we had planned anything. We hadn't. But because Richard knew the truth. And truth has a way of eventually introducing itself. "What exactly did Michael do to support you financially?" Silence. Complete silence. Forks stopped moving. Conversations stopped. Even Jennifer stopped smiling. I looked around the table. At my son. At my grandchildren. At the guests. At the black folder resting beside my chair. For weeks I had told myself I wasn't going to create a scene. I still wasn't. The truth doesn't require a scene, only a voice. I reached down and lifted the folder onto the table. No dramatic movement, no anger, no accusation, just a simple black folder. Jennifer's smile disappeared. "What is that?" she asked. I ignored the question. Instead, I opened the folder. The pages inside were neatly organized, chronological, carefully labeled. Years of history, years of facts. I removed the first document. A copy of the cashier's check Robert and I had used for the down payment on Michael and Jennifer's first house. I placed it gently on the table. Then another document. And another. College tuition payments. Loan records. Bank transfers. Mortgage assistance. Every page told part of the same story. The real story. Nobody spoke. The room was so quiet I could hear Christmas music playing faintly from another room. Richard leaned back in his chair, saying nothing, allowing the documents to speak for themselves. Michael stared at the papers. His face had gone pale. Jennifer looked from page to page, then toward me, then toward the guests. For the first time since I had known her, she looked completely unprepared. One of the guests picked up a document. His eyes widened. Wait. Another guest leaned closer. Then another. The silence began changing. Confusion, shock, realization. The atmosphere that had seemed so comfortable only minutes earlier was disappearing. And as more eyes moved across the documents spread before them, I realized something. The story Jennifer had spent years building wasn't collapsing because I attacked it. It was collapsing because it couldn't survive the truth. And the next thing Michael said would determine whether his family could survive it too. For several long seconds, nobody said a word. The documents remained spread across the table between the coffee cups, dessert plates, and Christmas decorations. Years of history, years of sacrifice, years of truth, and suddenly, the story everyone thought they knew didn't seem so certain anymore. Michael continued staring at the papers. I watched his eyes move from one document to another. The down payment check, the tuition records, the loan agreements, the transfers Robert and I had made during difficult years, documents he had seen before, documents he had signed before, documents he could not deny. The room felt strangely calm, not tense, not explosive, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when people realize they've been looking at something the wrong way for a very long time. Finally, Michael spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom?" I looked at him. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to sit at our kitchen table doing homework while Robert grilled hamburgers in the backyard. Not the successful 45-year-old man sitting across from me, just my son. A son who looked ashamed. "I forgot," he said. The words surprised everyone, including me. Jennifer immediately turned toward him. "What do you mean you forgot?" Michael rubbed his forehead. "I didn't forget the help." He swallowed hard. "I forgot how much help there was. Nobody moved, nobody interrupted. The honesty in his voice filled the room. Slowly, painfully. I kept telling myself we paid most of it back." His eyes drifted toward the documents. "But looking at this." He stopped, then quietly shook his head. "We didn't." Jennifer opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she had nothing to say. And perhaps that was the most surprising moment of the evening. Not because she was speechless, because she was finally listening. Michael looked at me again. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words were simple. No grand speech. No dramatic apology. Just 4 words. But they sounded real. And real matters more than perfect. I sat quietly for a moment, thinking about Thanksgiving, thinking about Robert, thinking about all the years in between. Then I smiled. Not because everything was fixed, not because the hurt had disappeared, but because the truth was finally sitting at the table. I never wanted repayment, I said softly. Several people looked at me. I continued. Your father and I helped because we loved you. Michael lowered his eyes. I could see tears forming. The house wasn't a debt. The tuition wasn't a debt. The loans weren't debts. I paused. They were gifts from parents who wanted their son to have a better life. The room remained silent. Even the children seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Then I looked toward Jennifer. For the first time all evening, for the first time since Thanksgiving, she couldn't meet my eyes. Not out of anger, out of embarrassment. And honestly, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel powerful. I simply felt tired. Tired of carrying a story that wasn't mine. Tired of pretending words didn't hurt. Tired of watching years of love rewritten as weakness. I don't need anyone to think I'm a hero, I said. I don't need credit for helping my family. I glanced around the table. But I won't sit quietly while people pretend my life happened differently than it did. Nobody argued. Nobody disagreed. Because facts have a way of ending debates. A few minutes later, conversations slowly resumed. Tentatively at first. Then more naturally. People asked questions, shared memories, talked about Robert. Several guests recalled moments when he had helped them too. The atmosphere softened. Not because everyone forgot what happened, because everyone finally understood it. As the evening came to an end, I gathered the documents and returned them to the folder. The same black folder that had sat beside my chair all night. When I stood to leave, Emma rushed over and hugged me. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart. Noah hugged me next. Then Michael. His embrace lasted longer than usual. Long enough for both of us to understand what didn't need to be said. Outside, fresh snow covered the neighborhood. The Christmas lights glowed softly against the darkness. As I walked toward my car, I thought about Robert. I imagined him standing beside me the way he used to, hands in his coat pockets, that gentle smile on his face. And for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace, not because I had won. This was never about winning. It was about something far more important, the truth. Helping my son had never made me weak. Loving my family had never made me foolish. And growing older had never made me a burden. The only mistake I made was allowing other people to tell my story for me. I unlocked my car and looked back at the house one last time. Inside were the people I loved. Imperfect people. Complicated people. People who had hurt me. People I would probably continue loving anyway. Because families are rarely perfect, but the truth matters. And that Christmas, after years of silence, the truth finally found its voice. Then I got into my car and drove home through the falling snow, carrying something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not revenge, not vindication, just dignity. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Looking back now, I realize that love and sacrifice should never require keeping score, but they should never be erased either. For years, I stayed silent, because I wanted peace. Yet silence allowed other people to rewrite the story of my life. Growing older didn't make me a burden, and helping my family never made me weak. If there's one lesson I learned, it's this. Kindness should come from the heart, but dignity must always be protected. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is simply tell the truth and let it stand on its own.